Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Rinaldi, and I am one of the hosts of devrelish. For those of you who've been regular watchers or listeners or whatever of this show, you'll notice that my co-host Erin is not here at the moment. She will be here, I promise. So if you're like tuning in, like, oh God, it's Brian, I really came here just for Erin and her pickle facts and her comedy. Don't worry, Erin will be here momentarily. She had a work commitment that I guess is running a little over schedule. Oh, wait a second. Oh, there she is. I was just talking about how everybody might just log off once you weren't here.
I just heard all the smack talking. It's okay.
They're like, we come here for the Erin entertainment portion, not for the Brian running his mouth portion. So anyway, I'm going to, before we continue with the show. Oh well. Sorry. See, you threw me off, Erin. All right. So for those of you who haven't joined before, devrel is a show all about devrel and all those devrel roles that are kind of out, like that aren't exactly like may not be developer advocate or developer relations type titled, but are in kind of under that umbrella. So that's why the ish. So anyway, that's what the show is about. My name is Brian Rinaldi. I'm a developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly, and my co-host is Erin. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm also a developer experience engineer at Launch Darkly, so it's dangerous.
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. Weird. This
How did that
cool.
happen?
I just came off a workshop from there. Dusting off my brain today.
Before we invite our guest on screen, we do need to thank we have a wonderful sponsor. So we want to thank Data Protocol for sponsoring devrelish. So Data Protocol, if you is basically like if you want to think about, they say Netflix for like devrel kind of thing for your developer community, but it's a little more than Netflix because it's also those videos. It's not just videos like all the videos that you want to show your community, but those videos are interactive. So there's a console that people can do stuff. It's really cool. So if you're interested in that, check Data Protocol out at dataprotocol.com. And thank you, Data Protocol, for sponsoring devrelish. So with that, we are going to invite Jonathan Gottfried onto the stage. Welcome, John.
Hello.
So, you are with Major League Hacking, but you also have like a long background in devrel. So we're going to chat a little bit about that. So like, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll chat about all the devrel stuff.
Sounds good. Hi, Erin. Good to meet you.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be here. So I have been doing developer community stuff for on the order of, I don't know, like 12, 13 years now, starting with a lot of community events in New York City, going on to companies like Echo Nest and Twilio in the early days on their evangelism team, and then eventually kind of going off on my own with my co-founder Swift to build MLH, which is the largest community of early career developers in the world. We've been doing this now for about 10 years and work with on the order of 150,000 developers a year, helping them sort of build their skills and get ready to actually apply those skills in the real world. And it's still just as fun as the day we started. So I'll leave it at that.
That's really cool. I guess we usually start with asking our guests like what got them into devrel, like what was your background maybe before devrel, and what led you down the path of becoming a developer advocate or whatever before you went and changed careers as well.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of devrel people, it's kind of a zigzaggy path. There's no bachelor's degree of devrel yet. I was fully intending to become a high school history teacher. And I got a degree in history. Oh, really?
What I have a degree in history too, and I wanted to be a history professor or a history teacher. I wasn't sure. So
was there a specific like time period or specialty?
Yes, I had a particular fascination with European history, in particular, like the Bismarck era, well into like World War One. That's kind of the things that I was fascinated about. And then I started doing some grad school stuff and doing like early Cold War history of the U.S.
There
And
you
then
go.
dropped out of grad school. So yeah, I don't know. What about you?
Yeah.
I did a lot of U.S. history around, basically like around World War II era. This is going to be really interesting to you and I, and probably
I was gonna say, I'm over here like, wait, you're on my no, you're recruited to the trivia team because like there's like a whole segment of like every time like the war questions come up, like all of us are just like, we have no history buffs on the like my bar league trivia team right now. So it's like y'all are both recruited. You're on the team because
perfect.
Yeah, I might be a little far, it might be a long drive.
Just
for
hop,
me,
skip, and jump over. I think,
you know,
well,
but John's nearby.
I'm in New York, but,
yeah, come on, Tuesday nights.
I'm terrible at trivia though, so yeah.
No, we need you. Trust me, I have my strengths, but one of my strengths is how to recruit a trivia team. I have been in the finals of the NYC Trivia League.
I would probably take you out of those finals, unfortunately.
No, trust me, because the ones we miss right now are in the history section. Is like, oh, none of us know wars, so
you never know.
You're up.
But yeah, I still like history. I haven't read quite as many history books since college, but programming was kind of a hobby. I found computer science a little too academic and not, hands-on enough. And as I was studying history, this is kind of where like, I don't know, like sometimes you just have a random chance event that shapes the whole course of your life. I got mono, which like common ailment for college students, felt terrible and took a semester off. And when I was back in my hometown in like suburban New York, I was bored out of my freaking mind because all my friends were gone. And so I was like, what do I do with these couple of months while I'm home? And I went on Craigslist because that's kind of what enterprising young people did at that point, and applied for programmer jobs. The main draw of it, to be totally honest, was that it could kind of like give me some spending money in college. But it turned out that there was an ed tech startup a block from my parents' house, and a lot of like interesting, weird people working there who more or less dragged me to the early days of New York tech events. And once I started going to things like hackathons and meetups, I was completely hooked. And, I became one of those people that was at every single event. I started getting recruited to volunteer and help organize them. And, for me, that was a really organic path into doing that professionally. But it all kind of happened due to these weird happenstance things over the course of a couple of years that, dragged me away from maybe being a history teacher and into the world of DevRel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also dragged away by the need to actually make money.
Yeah, kind of like, weren't we all? Because like I left journalism because the running joke in journalism is the pay sucks and everybody hates you. I wanted to be in political journalism, and so it's like the pay sucks and everybody really, really hates you if you're in political journalism.
Yeah. I think people probably hate history teachers slightly less, but the pay still sucks.
Yeah.
Exactly. So at this point you transitioned into a tech career. What got you into specifically DevRel? Like, how did you end up, transitioning to that?
Yeah. So, the guy who was my boss at this tiny ed tech startup, who like boss or supervisor is maybe a bit of a stretch there because he was, a year or two older and had dropped out of college and had no professional experience. But he was technically the lead engineer, and he left that startup. And after a couple of like random things, became one of Twilio's first developer evangelists. His name is John Britton, and he was the person who, I don't know if he invented it, but he certainly made famous their 5-minute demo. It was this iconic demo at the New York Tech Meetup back in about, I think it was 2009, maybe 2010. And he saw that I was going to a lot of these developer events, many of which he was sponsoring. And he basically just pitched me on doing some contracting for them. And I enjoyed it. I think I was decent enough at it, and it turned into a full-time job. And so, working at Twilio was really my first full-time role out of school. I was definitely the youngest one on the team by a good margin, but had only done, kind of like part-time work, freelance work, things like that beforehand, building people's websites and doing kind of random techie stuff over the years to make money.
Yeah, it's interesting because Twilio at that time, people always talk about, that was the like devrel program that everybody was trying to emulate. Because I think I've been in devrel for almost, I guess, about as long as you, like 12 years, 13 years, somewhere around there. And I remember Twilio was one of those that I think prior to Twilio, everybody was this more developer evangelist type that just went to big events and spoke the touring events kind of thing. And Twilio seemed to kind of change up the whole way devrel was done a bit, from rather than just kind of living on the road touring events to doing things like videos, short videos, and other kinds of content that really changed the way some of these programs were run. So I mean, how did that experience influence kind of the rest of your developer career, in developer relations career?
And I think that at that point in time, the idea of developer evangelism had been around, but it was definitely a new style of it. And I do think Twilio was a leader in that, but there were a lot of peer companies doing similar things. SendGrid, Mashery, even a lot of music tech companies like EchoNest, RDO, if you remember them. Folks like the early days of Heroku, a lot of these companies kind of came up around the same time, with similar grassroots strategies. I actually used to help run the New York, devrel meetup, and the people who went to that meetup and the people that we generally hung out with there were also the people sponsoring every tech event. And so you saw the same faces over and over again. And you learned from one another, right? You collaborated, you learned from one another, you shared techniques, and we were all kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. I think that the thing that I don't know that I took away from it is that, for one, there is a place for creativity and sort of eccentricity in developer communities in devrel. A lot of our big wins and a lot of my biggest personal wins back then were these weird off the wall concepts that people really gravitated towards. And I think the other part of it is that creating an environment where people are at the company are incentivized to actually think a little bit differently and outside the box. Makes a massive difference, versus perhaps overcorrecting towards too much structure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think you probably have strong opinions on that, Erin. No spicy takes on.
No, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is I see so often, and especially now, I think and it's something I've been guilty of in the past, of over processing or over formalizing something and just forgetting y'all, this is a very fun thing. We get to learn a lot of really cool stuff. I'm currently learning a lot of cool things or trying new things, and it's less about actually, and I think this is something that I can give a lot of kudos to Major League Hacking, is they've always made it seem very fun. And I think that's just a really great experience for everybody. But I think you do have a lot of, as much as Brian's giving me crap for jam in the comments, I was you have a lot of other stuff that's your jam as well. I'd be remiss if according to the LinkedIn comments, I've heard that you are a competitor on the Great American Baking Show.
I am. I do love baking. It's kind of my main non-techie hobby. So for anyone who is watching, it's what's that? It's the American version of Bake Off. So it's still Paul and Prue and the tent and all of that nonsense, but it's all Americans. It was really freaking cool. I mean, I'll start there. It's funny. It's the closest equivalent to a hackathon that I think you might have in the baking world. You have to build or create or bake something in a really short period of time. And so for me, I was this is my jam. This is what I'm into. This is fun. But it was really, I don't even know where to start. Like, there's so many things we could talk about with that, but like, it was an incredible experience. Like, I do think that one of the things that I have always, seeked out to participate in personally, but also to create for other people, are these like very intense, memorable experiences. Like, I used to be involved with this event called Startup Bus, which was literally a hackathon on a cross-country coach bus. Like I have done this baking show. Like, we do a lot of weird stuff at MLH. But all of it is kind of like experiential, right? Like, how do you create something that's going to impact someone that they won't forget, that shapes them in some way? And that's certainly what I felt about the baking show. It was also incredibly difficult, so that's maybe another factor to it. Stretches your comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I noticed, like, throughout all of your experiences, whether it's baking or Startup Bus or even just like scaling Major League Hacking, I think there's a lot of like, and I think kind of calling what Vinia and Socially Construct Online says in the comments is this, like, I feel like so many people like how do you approach events like in 2024 when people, I feel like there's a bajillion and 2 events now, like how, like, hosting the actual like hosting part of an event has gotten easier, but hosting a good event has gotten way more difficult.
So MLH operates in kind of a unique niche in terms of events, in that our events are for and by primarily college students. There's a lot to unpack with that, right? Like, imagine you're a college student. If I don't know what the average demographic of the people watching is, but like, for me, that was a little while ago. You have some autonomy, but not a ton. When you're a college student planning a hackathon, often you are in charge of like tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of someone else's money. You're trying to create an experience for like hundreds of other people from many different schools. It's a pretty big logistical undertaking for a lot of people for the first time. And so our job at MLH is often coaching, mentoring, and providing some structure for those community organizers to do something really special for their local communities. And so we're like one layer abstracted from organizing the events, right? Like, rather than us calling the school caterer and being like, great, can you get food for this hackathon? We're working with the local club and saying, hey, like, here's how you pitch your administrators. Here's how you talk to caterers. Here's how you order t-shirts. And really kind of like helping them learn how to build, whatever version of the event is right for their campus. And so when I think about like events, now, the biggest thing that's changed is, for colleges, everything is sort of like tribal knowledge that gets passed down from generation to generation, like very literally, like from the seniors to the juniors, and down. And, during the pandemic, there was obviously like this gap of a couple of years where people had stopped doing those in-person events and maybe gone to a virtual format. And a lot of that tribal knowledge got lost and had to be rebuilt in the last year or two. So, we've spent a lot of our efforts like re-teaching people how do you do in-person events. I think the demand is there. Like, certainly after a couple of year gap, people are a little desperate or hungry for in-person interaction. And so the student demand is there to go to the events, but the organizers definitely needed some additional support to kind of like plug that gap that was missing in the handoff of, a couple of years.
Yeah, I could imagine, like, especially for college students, because, even though it was just like a couple, 2-3 year gap, right? Like, the people who would be doing the events now, say 20, but they would have been 17. I mean, so they had never attended one. Like, you don't even have the experience of maybe of even having attended something like this before. So it's not like I could, you just completely started from scratch. Yeah. Or like, if you've been, for instance, we're like in devrel, I was like, okay, we didn't go to conferences for 2-3 years, but I still remember what the experience was like. It has changed a bit, I think, but like, it's, it's still more or less like it's not going to be something foreign to me. Whereas like for a student, I think that's a different scenario.
Yeah.
I'd argue almost maybe that's a good thing, because like then you're thinking about like what actually, like so many times where how many times have you been to a conference and I'm like, wow, this is terrible. And you're like, this is not great. Like, not
I don't know,
great.
you're
And you
gonna
throw
name
out, like,
names. Come on,
I'm not going to name names. I'm not trying to get.
I'm
not
kidding.
trying
I'm
to.
kidding. Of course, you're not
Like,
gonna know. I know.
I was like, I'm not going to name names. But like, we've all been to a crappy event. We can all honestly say we've been to an event and you're like, wow, this is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we stop and we break down, like, why was this not a good event? Was it the people? Like, no, I've been to bad events with people that I love. Was it the location? Was it like, you know, and you can run down, but it's like at so many times people didn't stop and think, like, what did we want this event to be? And like, what do people actually care about, rather than like, oh, we're just going to cookie cutter what we did the year before and hope it works. Like, that's not acceptable anymore. And I think the cool thing about MLH is like, they almost never get that. They never get a cookie cutter example. It's just probably setting them up for success in the start. Like, it's always a new thing.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Like, I think there's a forcing function of people rethinking what their events and communities are like, because everyone wants to leave an impact. You're literally dealing with a different like generation of people every time. The double-edged sword part of it is that there's a lot of reinventing the wheel, right? Like it's part of the fun part of putting on an event is sort of like putting your own stamp on it. And so I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, but I do think that people, you know, it's a balancing act of like, what do you keep versus what do you start over on? Yeah, I like this comment too. I mean, it's interesting. Like I don't know that that's the thing about physical events that I find special. Like, I do think that you hear a lot about what's going on afterwards, but for me, it's serendipity. Like, it is incredibly difficult to replicate the serendipity of being in a physical place with other people and finding something in common in a virtual format. We've tried, like we put a ton of time and effort into building like really good virtual hackathons, and you definitely see people forming connections, but it's not entirely the same as the depth of like personal relationships you can get from an in-person event.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't get the hallway track. Yeah, the hallway track is you can't recreate that. Like, you can't be like, oh, hey, we're all headed to the same event, have the same curiosity, same struggle, etc.
Yeah. But I do think, you know, there are other things. You lose that aspect, but you also gain people who might not have been able to go to an in-person event at all. You know,
there's definitely an accessibility component.
Yeah, either because it can be very expensive to attend an in-person event. I mean, if you're doing hackathons at colleges and universities, it's like, well, they're probably just there around campus already. But like from a conference standpoint, I mean, conferences are an expensive thing. Like getting to a conference can be expensive, and staying there, and the food and the conference ticket. It's a big budget item that, like, you know, I think not everybody can do. And then even I was reading a blog post by Pamela Fox, who was devrel at Google. Oh no, Microsoft. She was Google years ago.
Also, someone who did Startup Bus actually back in the day.
Oh, really? Yeah, and she was just posting about like being in devrel and being a mother of young kids, and like it's hard to get to events. I mean, you know, so like there's a number of any number of reasons why people can't get to these events, and I think it's good to have both. I like that now. Both is okay, because before it was like, I think you know, when I started doing these now 6.5 years ago, doing like virtual events, it was like, you know, people thought it was like a dumb idea, and honestly, I kind of did too, and I just kind of happened into it. But I'm really grateful that now it's a little more acceptable and people understand the benefits of both. But
I agree. I mean, we've played around with a lot of different formats for virtual events. What we've kind of arrived at that we found to be the most engaging is every event has a set period of time, right? Like that's maybe an obvious point. We have a gathering place for the event. Typically for us, that's Discord. And we have bursts of live activity. So this is maybe a hot take, but like I think that virtual conferences, like it does not matter in a lot of cases whether you're watching the talk live or recorded. Unless the event is specifically designed for audience engagement, it usually doesn't matter. One of the things that we've tried really hard to do with our events is, make it so that even if you're only there for 20 minutes live, that there is a reason for you to be there. That either the instructor or the speaker is doing something that you can directly engage with live, whether it's connecting to other attendees, or even just something that's like a time bound, kind of like happening that's not recorded or doesn't, really translate to being watched later. And it makes the events a lot more engaging. Like, I love the accessibility aspect of virtual events. Like, we do support both now because of that. But I don't think that you can directly take an in-person event and just pop it into a virtual format and assume it's going to be a good event. Like, there's a lot more nuance to it than that.
No, I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to just completely agree with that. I think, for a while, that's what I think folks were trying. Was really, we're going to recreate the expo floor with like virtual booths, and we're going to recreate. And so like none of that ever really worked. Well, the thing we do, like for instance, we've got our event coming up in 2 weeks. That's like one of the bigger ones we do every year, called the Jam.dev, and it's like 2 days. But one of the things we've done every year that we do these events is that the talk itself can be pre-recorded if the person wants to. They can do it live, they can do it pre-recorded, but the Q&A at the end is always live. So regardless of whether it's and I do feel like it's so much easier to get that kind of interactive Q&A going in a virtual event than you could get in an in-person event, because in-person events, speaker asks like, oh, if anybody has any questions, then immediately some people start leaving or chatting or whatever, and then you can't hear the questioner, and it just gets, it doesn't really work well unless it's it's a managed Q&A where like you have people out in the audience with a mic or something like that. But other than that, like it just generally works terribly. Whereas like virtual events, I mean, we have people chit-chatting here and we're putting them up on screen and responding to them. It's like, you're not going to have that in an in-person event in the same way. So it's one of the things I think works better. But
I also think, and I will shill the best virtual event that has ever been out there, and it was actually something that I attended pre-pandemic, and they've been virtual from the start, is MozFest. It's Mozilla Festival, and they are like, I have spoken at it before, and MozFest forces you to do an interactive segment. They're like, we understand that this is a different platform, but it means that like treat the platform differently, like be interactive. Like we did collaborative brainstorming, and like we're showing people how neurons work, and like we're super cool and geeky about it. And it's like, we have to be thinking about, if you're having a virtual first event, have a virtual first event, that's fine, but also be prominent with it being virtual. Like, I mean, like I always think the booth is actually a great example of how many virtual booths did we set up, where it's like, I've had to ran one of those virtual booths, and it's like,
it's lonely.
You're like sitting there and you're like, love people signing up it's like, why would you volunteer yourself to go watch an ad, is essentially what it is.
Exactly.
No,
sponsors didn't even like them because they'd ask if we had virtual booths. I'm like, no, we don't do virtual booths. It's a very bad idea. And they're like, oh, thank God, because it's not just that it's not really a benefit, because now I have to staff it, and I have to have somebody sit there and dedicate hours to a virtual booth where nobody really shows up. It's like,
not worth it.
Sponsors didn't like the experience, attendees didn't like the experience. I mean, it's just like, anyway.
Honestly, it's a lot more fun to hang out in a sponsored Discord channel, even if it's asynchronous.
Yeah, those are good.
Yeah.
The Fan Studies Conference did that really well, where they had async Discord channels for each of like topics of fandom. This is a very nerdy, geeky academic.
That's cool.
But it's like so cool. It's like, let's talk about like the inner nuances of this subculture of this fandom for this age group. And it's like, rad, this is so geeky and so cool. But I think we can learn a lot from gaming. I think we can learn a lot from, because gaming, I mean, esports and gaming is kind of taken off from, and I think, Vinia says it really well, like these areas have just taken off, and they've started because like it's not like people are playing board games. I mean, they were kind of in some ways, but not quite the same.
Yeah, I did a lot of board game Zoom chats at one point. Interestingly, for the event series I'm talking about that's virtual, we use Twitch primarily because, at least for our demographic, like people are familiar with it, they engage on it, they have accounts. Like it's a very natural interaction for a lot of what's going on, and the comment sections are very lively. Kind of like this.
Yeah. We have a good
we always
comment
have a
section.
lively
Thanks.
section.
Thank you, comment section, for being a great comment section.
Yeah, it's always lively in this show. I love it.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
Sam actually has a question. She
Ooh.
says, favorite tools for engaging audiences virtually.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Discord. Personally, I find Discord to be stronger for community building than something like Slack. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that's kind of what we found. We use Twitch a lot. We actually use StreamYard, which is what you all are using to broadcast this. Fantastic piece of software for multi-streaming or even just like having a virtual production studio. We also, use a lot of kind of like home-built tools. Like we have some utilities for putting together virtual schedules and tracking engagement and managing people's participation in the event and all of that kind of thing.
That's cool. I wish I could pick your brain some more on this stuff because like, I've been doing this a while. The only tools I use obviously StreamYard.
Yep.
We use Crowdcast is where like some of the actual like bigger events are done mostly because it has a built-in chat and stuff like that. Although I'm going to be honest, I'll be upfront with you and with the audience that the real reason is because if I did everything with YouTube doesn't give me a way of communicating with people. So how do I, other than like YouTube relying on YouTube to tell them, hey, there's a show coming up or there's these things coming up or whatever, I have no way to communicate. So like the only way I can is if you go through Crowdcast, all it takes is your email, but then I can then communicate with you via email. And that's the reason I can't. I keep wanting to not pay for it, but it's like I can't let it go because the email list is where a lot of people hear about this stuff.
That's exactly like as much as I like. So outside of my day job, I do stand-up comedy and I produce 3 shows. John, I'll hit you up if you want to come. We've got some weird ones.
I honestly would.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have a weird AI versus human ones that we do where we train AI models to roast humans. It's pretty weird. So
that sounds very dystopian.
Yeah, it's very dystopian, very fun. But
we did it virtual too one time.
Yeah, we did it virtual. We roasted Brian. It's gotten more savage since then. It's gotten more savage.
I'm not sure I'm going to invite you all back.
It's gotten more savage because I was playing around with machine learning. It's my excuse to write off like machine learning and random tools. But in the comedy world, everything is via Instagram, and everybody wants Instagram ads, Instagram promotions in person, and like. But Eventbrite, they all like, I tried running it off of Luma and they don't care. They're like, do not send me a Luma invite. They want Eventbrite and it's not a legit show unless you have the Eventbrite, which is the weirdest thing ever, right? It's like, you would think it's just a sign up platform, but it's so baked into these like sub community cultures which is very fascinating to me. I could totally geek out on that.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff like that. Like we, have used Tito for various things, which I love, but I've gotten like feedback occasionally that people are like, what is this? Like, I'm not familiar with this. This is new and scary. And, I think, I don't know, like every niche community probably has their own things that they rely on. Like I have groups of people that organize tech meetups on Partyful. It's like, that's kind of odd, but sure, if it works, like it works.
Tito. What's Tito?
I haven't heard that one. Yeah.
Oh man.
I know Partyful's huge in New York. Partyful like seems to be the new like happy hour meetup group in New York.
I hadn't heard of Partyful either, to be honest. So like these are new to me.
So Tito is, it's an event hosting platform. We actually use it to run our conference ticket sales and stuff like that. It's really good. It's ti.to, made by, it's an Irish company, I believe. I don't know what's so special about it, but it is just like so intuitive and easy to use and like nice looking. There's not a lot of like cruft. Big fan of that platform, honestly. A number of conferences have started using it.
Nice.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm like
Yeah, I
currently
mean,
learning that for.
it's interesting to see where these things are going, because I think I can't remember the name of that platform that everybody was using during the
Hopin,
Hopin.
who I
I'm
believe
not-
owns StreamYard now.
They do. Am I allowed to talk bad about it on StreamYard then? Will StreamYard
Hopin doesn't sponsor us.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't used the platform in a while. I just didn't like it particularly at the time. I felt like it was trying to do exactly what we were talking about, recreate in person virtually. And it's like, well, that's not what, virtual and in person is just two different things. I mean, can't try and treat them the same. So, but yeah, maybe they've adjusted because everybody had to adjust. I mean, look, in-person events had to adjust because, we've talked about this before. I have very strong opinions on this, but even in-person events, like I'm seeing the trends I'm seeing now for like larger conferences in person in-person conferences, not hackathons per se, is that it seems like there's still a lot of them struggling big time financially, particularly like the ones that aren't like company sponsored, like as in a marketing event essentially. But the big ones are getting bigger. It's just like everybody's got like their limited travel budgets and event budgets now, and it's like, well, if I can only really pick one event, and I might as well just
They all
throw
go
it
to
all at,
KubeCon.
like, or whatever, KubeCon or like reInvent or whatever it ends up being like. And it's like I'm not going to take a chance on this smaller event that I don't know a lot about. This is just totally pure hypothesis, because I'm just, it was a year ago, it seemed like most events were doing poorly financially, right? Like they were still down about like 30-40%. And now it seems like some events have gotten back to where they were or even grown from where they were. But like you talk to the organizers of some smaller events, like the more like 500 to 1,000 person events, and they're in most of the ones I've ever talked to are like, no, it's going terribly. So
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Erin.
Mine is like some of these events are also just, again, I think we need to ask the question, is this an event anymore? Because I think so many events were like, we've been an event for 20 plus years and it's like, great, but like, okay. And I think exactly what Henri said is like, people are going to where everybody else is. Like at some point, I'm just going to call you up if I want to hang out with you and see you, or like I'll Slack you on Discord or whatever, or hang out with you somewhere else rather than going to a conference. It's much cheaper for my company's budget and whatnot.
I think that every DevRel person I talk to has I'm going to say a very biased opinion about conferences, because it's part of our jobs to go to them. And I think when I talk to people who are engineers or students or like going to conferences either for fun or professional development, it's a very different story. A lot of those people go to like 1 or 2 events a year. And that is like a really novel thing. And I think that a lot of people want to get like the best bang for their buck, which is why they go to those big events, right? If you're in a reasonable size city or metro these days, there are local events you can go to for free. But like if your employer is paying for your travel and expenses and conference ticket, like there's a draw to going to something big and flashy that like has a big name musical artist for the closing show, and like it's an experience that is easy to justify to work, but also has a lot of fun elements. And like obviously smaller, more niche conferences have a lot of fun elements, but you may not perceive it the same way in terms of like your own personal value that you get out of it, because you may not already be connected to that community.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think you made a point. I was going to follow up and to make exactly that, and you already did it for me, which is that it's also easier to justify to your employer, right? Like if
Yep.
I go to them and I say, hey, we're a big AWS customer, and I want to, I use the budget for like to go to reInvent, or we're Microsoft, I'm going to go to Build, or they know like a conference they know of, that it's like I can easily pitch the value. Where if it's like a smaller event that they haven't heard of, I think it's harder, and that's what's happened. Like I said, is these budgets have been cut. And so like now I have to do a lot more justifying of like, where am I going? Where am I spending my, travel budget on to attend an event? And so it's like, it's just easier to sell them on the big events. And
Mhm.
even though
Yeah.
I personally, like, I enjoy the big events, but I will say like the ones I've gotten the most out of in my experience have actually been smaller, because that's
Yes.
where I actually get to meet people. That's where it's easier to just join that hallway track. Like, I mean, there's no hallway track really to speak of at reInvent. You're just trying to kind of get through. Like, it's just madness, right?
You're
Like,
looking
whereas,
for
like,
quiet. I'm like,
Yep.
you're surviving and you're looking for quiet.
exactly. So yeah, I think I think the my favorite events have all been around the 300 to 500 person range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is like a larger trend, right? Like if you think about where people are gathering in general these days, there's kind of like two options, right? It's like big, massive, open to everyone, or small, niche, sometimes invite only. And I think events are a reflection of that. Like when I think about where I spend my time online, I'm spending it way less on things like Twitter and more in Discord communities or Slacks or private groups where it's like some shared interest. But like they're kind of like Twitter is the reinvent of the web. I don't know if that's a hot take, but like I think, I mean, that's not a direct analogy, but like the idea that this is a big platform that everyone is at, that you can kind of get lost in or have a name at, is, I think, an apt analogy. But the devrel collective Slack, for example, is like the opposite of that. Like that's like the niche, place where people can hang out and talk shop. I agree with you though. Like I prefer the 300 to 500 event size, sometimes even smaller. Like some of the best events I've been to in the last couple of years are on the 200 person mark.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
great.
One of the best conferences that I've been to, and it was such a good conference. It got me to sign up to volunteer to help organize various other conferences with them and volunteer. Is the Pi Data Berlin was so well ran, but it was about 500 people, 400, 500 people. Everything was at one venue, and they were very intentional to make sure that they had limited. So like you only had like 3 talks going on at once. So it was like you built a lot of relationships, and the way that they staggered the combination of workshops and talks was so well done that it was like, and just the venue was so great for actually meeting people. It was in a circular venue, so you had to run into people all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. Smart. There's actually a parallel to this in the MLH like hackathon world. We've been doing this for 10 years now, and when we started, there were a handful of small events, like on the order of 100 to 200 people. And then a couple of events came around, and they were like, we want to be big. We want to be like 1,000 to 2,000 people. And there was a lot of pushback around it, and a lot of debate around like how that would cannibalize, the smaller events, and how that would, I don't know, like change the vibes, not for the better. Like all of these things that people were really, really worried about. And, I shared some of those concerns. Like I definitely was one of the people advocating for more smaller events. The funny thing is that what actually ended up happening is the big events became a like flashy draw for people to dip their toes in. And that led to a lot more propagation of events where people would go to that 1,000 or 2,000 person event and be like, that was crazy. That was awesome. I'm going to go back to my school and do something similar. And maybe they did a 100 person event, but I actually have seen the same thing with tech conferences where you might go to reInvent, and that might be the one event you go to a year, but that might actually motivate you to be more involved in your local meetup or conference or whatever it is back home. And so I do think someone in comments was talking about like the big events maybe need to like support the small events without slapping their name on it. I do think there's an argument that by existing, they are creating sort of a template that people can emulate to build their own communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about the smaller events, by the way, that I think makes it financially difficult is just like it's easy to convince a sponsor why they should be at a 1,500 person event. It's especially again with budgets being cut, when marketing budgets and event budgets have been cut. Like it's a lot harder to make that case to a sponsor for like a 300 person event. It's like, I have to send people, I have to send my booth stuff. There's a lot of kind of fixed costs like involved there that like don't scale well, that scale down well. So like, anyway, and I'm again saying this as somebody who like 100% wants more small events and wants to figure out like how they can be viable. And I mean, I had this idea at one point that like I'm like maybe as like a side thing of CFE, because CFE is a side thing, so this would be a side thing. But anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I
it
don't know.
was
I'm
basically
really
like a niche little events, like like where you charge a little bit more for the ticket, but like drop a lot of the sponsor stuff, because like the people are coming more to like just like a little bit of an exclusivity to it. It's like cap it out at some low number. And I don't know if that would sell. I don't know if people would buy the tickets, but that was my idea, is like more like just trying to come up with how can we rethink some of the events, because I think conferences are need some disruption and need some, not the, obviously, like I said, the big ones are doing great and people want to go to them, but like we maybe need to rethink some of the other developer events that are struggling to survive.
Well, and I think like if I was a developer event runner person right now, I think like the things that we can ask for are very different. Like we can ask for, like, one of the things I've started to see is like events asking for sponsorship of the meetup. Like, oh, you want a happy hour after the conference? Great. Company has to sponsor that. This happy hour, instead of like a company having their own third party event, like open it up to the entire conference and have a sponsored happy hour or a sponsored dinner or stuff like that, where it's like you're still bringing in everybody from the conference and you're still bringing that vibe together, but you're still getting that benefit of a brand logo or recognition. And let's be honest, like who's going to not go to the happy hour? Like that's usually the most busy thing. That's the stuff that people don't skip. Like they'll skip the talk and they'll be like, this is going to be recorded later, but the happy hour I'm not skipping. So like, that's a great call. I also think like sponsoring a workshop, like instead of like sponsoring, we're seeing that kind of happen more, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to, in my opinion, an overcorrection towards needing to measure everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when the people in the comments here are saying like, oh, it'd be really nice to have a company underwrite 3 smaller events versus 1 large event. The thing that's driving that decision is the large event has a really good lead scanner and they collect opt-ins for you. And you can tell your boss that you had 5,000 impressions on the logo on stage. And like, that's great. Like what is the quality of those interactions is the question I would ask. But I do think that it's easier in a lot of cases to measure when there's more structure around the events. And that, one of the things that smaller communities and smaller events often struggle to do is justify their ROI to sponsors, because being a good community organizer and being a good event planner is not necessarily the same thing as speaking sales or speaking marketing. And I think that disconnect is part of why small events often struggle, is because it's like a passion project or a side project for someone who is not as familiar with that world. And a lot of them gain that familiarity over time. But like, I remember MLH has sponsored a lot of events. We've run a lot of events. I sponsored a lot of events at Twilio, and like, you get a big flashy report from the big ones, and the little ones send you an email that says thank you. And I do think that there's like a nice place you could meet in the middle there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed. So we are running up on our hour. This is like honestly, I would just keep this is
another really good one.
a topic
relevant.
that's, yeah, this is a topic that I am personally very passionate about because I used to run a lot of conferences.
Yep.
And it was only like I started doing this site, and then I still did a lot of conferences, but then after the pandemic, I have not gone back to it because for the reason that I know, having done a lot of them, I know a lot of organizers, and every event I get to go to, or every time I get to talk to them, I'm like, so how's it going? And they'll tell
Times
me,
are
and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm still staying on the sidelines. I can't, but
I
yeah.
think this,
So
yeah,
go ahead.
this is the first year. I really like this conversation. I'll add it because one of the things, this is the first year I actually was talking with someone, and I was like, what conferences, like I've been invited to conferences, but what conferences do I not go to? Like what ones were soul sucking, like not great? And that's not to say that like they weren't great, but like, where is my time best spent? Like if I have X hours in the day, is this going to add the same value as doing a meetup or whatever else? Like what else, what's the time, the best benefit? And I hate thinking in terms of that, but like, because I think they're fun and they're great, but like, I also think at the end of the day, like we have to think about that.
Yep.
Even if it's for me to sit at home and tell my dog he's handsome. Okay. Like these are important things.
That's important too.
Yeah, I do need to. This talk has made it clear that I need to get Erin, like, and I need to sit down, grab a beer, and I need to like get her to divulge all these conferences that are. she's got some strong opinions about some soul sucking conferences. I'm like, I mean, I've been to some that I'm like, didn't think were great, but clearly I'm not going to the worst. Oh, okay.
So I have a slight tangent. So as many of y'all know, I was a journalist and I have 2 degrees in journalism and I've spent 8 months in a newsroom. So I spent the fall 2019 semester of school. I was researching I was on a team of students that NYU is paying to research Lyme disease conspiracy theories on the internet.
Okay.
I went to a Lyme disease conference, and it was not about like, how do we solve Lyme disease? It was like people conspiracy theorying about Lyme diseases. Like they were like, and at the end of the day, you felt really bad because these people who were clearly suffering were spending thousands of dollars on this conference to get treatment for a very real condition. Like it is a very real condition. But then they'd be like, do you know that Lyme disease is a Cold War weapon? And it's like,
oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. This happened in New York City, John. So just letting you know, 2019.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, we got everything.
Yeah, we got everything. But then it all happened, and then 2020 hit, and I was like, now that I know the pandemic is happening, and I just spent 6 months studying how medical misinformation spreads online and leads to a physical conference. So it was like following the online conference, the online to the physical.
At least you were prepared.
I was literally like, this is the most traumatic. I don't need to see this again, and now I'm going to watch it in real time.
Yeah,
that's wild.
That's soul sucking for a very different reason. But it reminds me of like when I went, I got on an airplane once that was packed, and it was like, and this guy's like, "Oh, are you going to the SharePoint conference?" Because everybody on the plane for the SharePoint conference. I'm like, thank God, no. That's really I can't imagine spending days talking about SharePoint. I mean, nothing against people who like SharePoint. I'm sorry if you're listening and you love SharePoint, which, yeah, I mean, I don't know if this would be your show, but like, I don't. It just did not sound appealing to me whatsoever.
Yeah.
But
I went to a conference. I mean, this is 12 years ago now. I'm not even going to call out the name because it doesn't matter. But it was a very old school tech conference in a casino in Reno. So you can imagine the vibes. And everyone there was super nice. And the organizers were definitely well-intentioned. But there was definitely like this undertone to it of like, it just like felt a little off, you know what I mean? And being in a casino where you can smoke indoors in Reno, like definitely didn't help the vibes. And it really, because I was going to a ton of conferences at that point, it really kind of like outlined the difference for me between like old school conferences where it's like, you go and you're in like a windowless room and like doing whatever, versus like new school conferences, which are very experiential and like in many cases fun and interesting. It was a unique experience. I can't say I ever really wanted to go back, but it was
gonna have
different.
to DM you because I lived in Reno for 10 years, so I would have been in Reno during that time going to tech conferences.
I'll tell you what the conference was.
Yeah.
I'll DM you after. But
yeah, DM me, yeah, because I'm very curious.
Yeah.
I also, my college graduation in Reno shared, Reno brings some bonkers conferences.
Oh, yeah.
So I will admit, we used to have the annual furry convention the same weekend as graduation.
Nice.
It was college graduation in cities.
Yeah. My memory of that conference is I was sitting next to like this woman on the plane who was very friendly. And after the conference, I was like wandering around the casino because I was bored. And she was like sitting at a table and she was like, "Oh, come over. And I was like, "Okay, fine. Like I'll play like, some whatever, like 50-cent blackjack." And she gave me like a massive pile of chips. And I was like, "Hey, I'm going to lose this in about 30 seconds. She was like, "Oh, it's fine. It's fine." And I proceeded to lose it in about 30 seconds and never spoke to her again.
That checks out. That is so.
That was Reno.
That checks out for Reno. Honestly,
Yeah,
not mad at all.
Yep.
We do have a pickle fact today.
We
Not about
do.
Reno,
I was going to ask about the pickle fact. Okay.
Oh, I always bring a pickle fact. Okay, this is
John,
the most
I don't know if
important
you
part of my
watched
day.
the show before, but we always
I have, and I love pickles and pickle fact.
Oh,
Okay,
great.
good.
Do you have a favorite
I don't
kind
need
of
to
pickle,
explain
John?
it.
I mean, I kind of like a garlic dill personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
The farmer's market
She's judging you.
here does have it's a horseradish dill that you might like.
Ooh,
Oh.
It's a
sounds
spicy
good.
horseradish. It's very good.
That does sound good.
We'll swap farmers market stories and all that good stuff. But this is football related because we're coming up on Super Bowl and 'tis the season. When the Philadelphia Eagles thrashed the Dallas Cowboys, that's their words, not mine, in sweltering heat in September 2000, this is written like a headline, players attributed the win to one thing, and it was guzzling down immense quantities of ice-cold pickle juice, which they kept on the field during that game. So pour yourself a pickleback, John. I'm here for the pickleback.
Okay.
Pour
I will
yourself a
get off and
pickleback.
have a little pickle juice.
Okay.
And
So-
for performance,
If I were trying to play football in the freezing cold, I might give that a shot, but I'm not, thank goodness. So I don't,
studies have yet
I
to be
love
proven to
pickles,
help.
but I don't do pickle juice really.
It's just like devrel.
Yeah,
It
just like-
is?
yeah, it's exactly the same. Same, but different.
Okay. All right. So
He's not convinced.
no, I'm not. You haven't.
On that note,
On that note,
We're
we're gonna
done.
call it. This is yeah. Before we descend further into our, as somebody said, our tinfoil hats and stuff like. So this was obviously, we had a great time chatting with you, John. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everybody in the audience for joining us. Next up on CFE is going to be the jam.dev coming up in 2 weeks exactly, actually less than 2 weeks, 2 weeks from yesterday. Going to be a great event, so please check it out. And we'll be back with Dev Relish again next month. Don't know exactly when. We need to get on a regular schedule, Erin. But anyway.
Yeah, we started a regular schedule, and then apparently life happens. That
Yeah.
lasted, I think, 2 episodes.
Yeah.
So it's
So-
consistent if it happens twice.
We will, but I really appreciate everybody comes anyway. So thank you all for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye.
thanks for having
Later,
me.
all. Thank you.